Clavicus Vile, the Daedric Prince of Bargains and Wishes. If you wish to summon him for a trade, you would do so on the 1st of Morningstar, which equates to the 1st of January. What's interesting is that Morningstar means Lucifer, or rather Lucifer means Morningstar in some translations of Latin. Lucifer was one of the names given to the planet Venus, meaning morning star, and the devil was named Lucifer, which represented the one who fell from the heavens, or the one who fell from the stars. Now this equation between Clavicus Vile and Lucifer is interesting, as the representation of Vile in Elder Scrolls shows him as an imp, with the horns and all, but more importantly, the concept of making a deal with the devil is at its truest when dealing with this particular Daedric prince. I say this because this is the Daedric prince that will hear your tales and give you what you wish for the most. Whether you're seeking riches, or seeking to be the most affluent of bards, or seeking to appear beautiful to those who see you, Clavicus Vile is the one who you would need and the one who would grant you your heart's desire. But a trade is always asked for, a tit for a tat. He gives you what you seek and you give him what he wants in exchange. As the Prince of Bargains, he loves, nay, he craves trading, but not for trading's sake. Once again, the Prince of Bargains. It is not necessarily a bargain if nothing is gained by the trade, and the Prince always makes sure he gets the upper edge in every deal he makes. He doesn't always win, but that's what makes it fun for him. Being a trickster and a fun-loving Daedra, anything can happen when making a deal with this devil. In fact, it is well known to never willingly offer a gift to the Daedric Lord, for he will refuse to take anything for free. A trade must always be made, and if you get to choose what gift to give him, say a bouquet of flowers, then he will get to choose which gift to give you, say the gift of undeath. Why? Because that would amuse him. When trading with the Lord of Bargains, always make sure you read the fine print and know exactly what you're getting in exchange, though that is typically impossible.
Years ago, a terrible sickness swept through our lands. I had to do something to keep my people safe. It's why I made a deal with the Daedra. Before the sickness, our miners uncovered an old temple to Clavicus Vile. When we were dying, I sought the Daedric Prince of Bargains to save our village at any cost. I begged the Daedra for immunity to the sickness. You can see the cost.
Clavicus Vile, though, is a particularly sociable Daedra. In fact, he is considered to be probably the most human out of all the princes. This comes from the fact that his particular domain centers around dealing with other people, since he loves to trade so much. He ends up interacting with mortals all the time. In fact, his Daedric realm shows this to be the case. See, Daedric realms are a personification of the Lord made manifest, what is deepest within their self-conscious, and what it is that they desire the most, the very center of their being. See, Molag Bal's domain is a literal copy of Nirn, but destroyed, because that is what he craves for the most, and everything he does is to come to that end. A Nirn in ruins and its people subjugated. Mehrunes Dagon is a lord of chaos and destruction, and his realm is literally just volcanic lava and destroyed rock formations. There's nothing in his mind other than absolute nothingness. That absolute nothingness that would come from him destroying all that is. Clavicus' realm, though, on the other hand, is called the Fields of Regret, and it shows what's truly deep inside of him. The realm shows itself to be the idea of the perfect countryside, with merchant cities, beautiful fields of flowers, rolling hills, gorgeous springs in the forest, bright blue skies, and perfume-smelling air. It's nice. Various cities made entirely of glass who are glorious to look at and tranquil places of rest. There might be the occasional bout of rotting flesh in the smell of the meadows, but overall the place is idyllic in design. It's a place for merchants to live and thrive and trade with each other, mostly populated by the Daedric race of the Scafin, a race of lesser Daedra created by Clavicus in his image. This realm is supposed to be a representation of the mind of Clavicus, what he truly wants, what is deepest in the recesses of his mind. He seemingly wants what we have in the mortal realm, as what he has chosen to create mirrors quite heavily what is most definitely possible and achievable right here on Nirn. In fact, his humanity can be seen the most in what he has chosen to use his power for, in the creation of his most powerful artifact, Barbas. Barbas is a Daedra, but more than that, he is part of Clavicus. In fact, you could even say that he is literally Clavicus. Barbas is a piece of the Daedric Lord, a piece that he severed in order to create a sentient companion to befriend. And more than anything, that just goes to show how sociable this Daedric prince truly is, how far he's willing to go in order to have someone with him. Part of his trickster demeanor, childish stubbornness, and the Daedric blood that flows through his veins forces him to be mean to Barbas many times over, banishing him from time to time and playing terribly mean tricks on the dog, but that's why he is considered a child god. At the end of the day, it's all just play. Throughout the Untold Ages, you would always see them together, side by side, for this was the price that Clavicus had to pay to have his immortal follower. So much of Clavicus's power was given to Barbas in his creation that without him, Clavicus is actually quite weak. You see, this prince is one of the few Daedric lords that actually has the power to manifest himself almost fully in the world of Nirn. Powers that other Daedras simply do not have. For example, Molag Bal requires agents in the world in order to accomplish things as simple as killing a person. If Molag Bal wanted someone dead, he would have to go through a myriad of hoops in order to make that happen. Clavicus, though, if you do find yourself close to his shrine, all is allowed and anything can happen.
You bear a gift? How thoughtful! But I can't accept it without providing one of my own. I know. I'll share the same gift I gave Stilrise Village. Now you can play Skeever Wicket with your own skull.
This is why it is so much easier for him to grant wishes to mortals. His power and accessibility to Nirn is far greater than other lords. Just in Skyrim, you can see Barbas just walking around like he's just another mortal. Very similar to Sanguine in that regard, who can also manifest himself quite freely in this world. This ability, however, for Clavicus is only reachable as long as Barbas is there with him. My original point being the amount of power that Clavicus sacrificed to create Barbas is so much that it is actually the difference between being able to exist on Nirn or not, shown by the fact that when Barbas is free roaming the world, Clavicus is forced to only being able to project himself to his shrines and nowhere else. But this now brings us to, outside of Barbas, what is his most famous artifact, the legendary black sword Umbra. See, the one thing that Clavicus Vile likes to trade for the most is souls. He likes souls. It is not believed that he does anything particularly nefarious with them, he just likes to hoard them. Most probably as a way to fill his Daedric domain with living entities. Scafin are known to enjoy eating souls, a particular delicacy within the lords and rulers of the cities of the Fields of Regret. So that could very well be the end result of you selling your soul to Clavicus. However, we also know that the creation of lesser Daedra like the Scafin requires souls. So it is most probably that selling your soul to this prince will mean that you will be transformed into one of his many Daedra and spend the rest of eternity living in one of these beautiful merchant cities, which is honestly not too bad. But what does all of this have to do with the sword Umbra? Well, the sword was made to collect souls for the prince. See, back in Elder Scrolls Morrowind, you could find an orc wielding the magical sword. Very similar to the Ebony warrior from Skyrim, this orc had lived a life full of action, and now wants that life to end. The sword in his hand has vanquished hordes of Daedra, slaughtered innocents, punished the wicked, razed towns, and saved cities. Nobody could ever match him, and as such, it now befalls to the main character to grant his wishes for an honorable death so that he can finally pass away. This orc calls himself Umbra, using the name of his blade, which has granted him glory throughout his life. See, the blade is actually sentient, and it manipulates the mind of whoever wields it. Its goal is to gorge itself on the souls of its victims in order to grow in power, and it mind controls its wielder in however ways it can in order to make that happen, in order to slay as many foes as possible. The orc calls himself Umbra because it seems the blade has completely taken over its body, to the point where the identity of the two are so intertwined it would be hard now to tell them apart. The blade, however, is extremely choosy when it comes to owners, and when it feels like its wielder can no longer serve its purpose, it will then seek to eliminate him. And eliminating him the main character does, obtaining the Umbra sword from his corpse. The sword gorging itself on souls and passing from hand to hand wasn't quite the intention that Clavicus Vile had in mind when he ordered the creation of the blade. It was the ancient witch Naendra who was tasked with the enchanting of this powerful weapon. However, when the blade was being created, it was incredibly unstable. The witch told Clavicus that the artifact needed a portion of the Lord's power in order to stabilize it. But when this was given, the witch betrayed the Lord, gave the blade a form of sentient freedom, and then hid the blade. The ancient witch was slain for her betrayal, but the sword was now on the loose, and with a big portion of Clavicus Vile's power. The Daedric prince had been looking for this blade since its creation now, but couldn't find it. One reason was because the sword itself was particularly intelligent, but mostly because of the shape-shifting ability the sword has. The Umbra sword has the ability to change the way it looks at will, including its size. This is why the sword is a claymore during Morrowind, but a one-handed blade during Oblivion. It always shifted its looks in order to hide from its master. Now, the sword gets captured during Elder Scrolls Oblivion. It is the Clavicus Vile quest that you obtain by finding his shrine. The quest is simple. You go on an old elvish ruin, you kill the wielder of Umbra, and then return the sword, finally to the Daedric prince. What catches your eye, though, is that as you're attempting to return the weapon, you are surprised by Barbas, who warns you to please not return the blade to Clavicus Vile, claiming that returning the blade would cause tremendous harm to the Daedric prince. Of course, when you do return the blade, you don't see anything bad happen. But now this is where things get really interesting, because this is not something that you can find in either Morrowind, Oblivion, or Skyrim. What actually happens to Clavicus Vile when the hero of Kvatch returned the Umbra sword? To explain this, we have to go on a little bit of a tangent. This is Vivec City, a place you can go to on both Elder Scrolls Morrowind and on Elder Scrolls Online when using the Morrowind expansion. And this is the Ministry of Truth, an enormous piece of rock that floats just above the city, a location that you would have been familiar with if you played Elder Scrolls Morrowind. This is where the Dark Elves keep their prisoners, since the only way of reaching it and leaving it is through levitation magic, so for the most part it is an inescapable prison. This was actually an asteroid that was flung from the skies directly into Vivec City by Shogorath, who held an extreme grudge against Vivec. Vivec, of course, being the demigod who forms part of the tribunal who ruled the Dunmer for much of history. The asteroid was stopped in its tracks thanks to divine magic used by Vivec, and those same divine magics keep it in place. Vivec, however, disappeared close to the events of Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and he hasn't been seen since. The magics that kept the asteroid floating were breaking apart, and the chunk of rock was threatening to destroy the entire city by falling into it. And as such, a magical device was created in order to keep the asteroid afloat. This magical device, however, was made thanks to a deal between Buhan, a wizard, and Clavicus Vile. Clavicus was willing to use energy from his Daedric realm in order to keep the asteroid suspended, but in exchange, the Dunmer would have to offer the Daedric prince souls in order to sustain the artifact. This magical artifact was called the Ingenium. At first, the Dark Elves offered up the souls of their prisoners, but the amount of souls needed to keep the Ingenium running required about 10 souls a day, and the elves were running out of prisoners. That's when they discovered that more pure souls would grant more stability and more time, so they started to offer innocence and kind-hearted souls to the artifact. Just one of such pure souls given to the Ingenium would grant several months of stability. After years of this, one particular woman was to be offered to the device, but the lover wasn't about to let his beloved sacrifice herself. The conflict from this event ended up destroying the Ingenium, and the asteroid fell from the skies and completely destroyed the city. The cataclysmic fall was so strong that nothing was left standing, and in fact it was the actual catalyst to the eruption of Red Mountain, which, as we know, completely destroyed life in all of Morrowind as we know it. It caused Vanderfell to be obliterated, it caused the mass migration of Dark Elves into Skyrim, and it weakened the Dunmer enough for the Argonians to invade. Overall, just a terrible event. The destruction of the Ingenium, however, immediately banished the wizard Buhan into the realm of Clavicus Vile, saving his life. When he was ported into the Fields of Regret, however, he didn't find Clavicus there. He found a shadowy figure in front of him, an oddly shaped humanoid-looking mass of dark power that called himself Umbra. See, when Clavicus Vile took Umbra from the hero of Kvatch back in Elder Scrolls Oblivion, he took the sword back to his realm, but inside of the realm, the sword was more powerful than Clavicus anticipated. The sentient entity separated himself from the blade, stole an enormous amount of power from the prince, again, and hid in one of the many cities that borders his kingdom. Thanks to the powers Umbra stole from Clavicus Vile, the prince couldn't find him, even in his own realm. And so Umbra hid and waited. While hidden, Umbra had seen the powers of the Ingenium and had a plan. As soon as the creator of the Ingenium, Buhan, was sported into the Fields of Regret, Umbra ambushed him and kidnapped him. He forced Buhan to create another Ingenium, one that could create a form of bubble around a huge swath of land inside of the Fields of Regret. And then, after the bubble was created, Umbra would use some of the power he stole from Clavicus and a buttload of souls in order to separate the land from the realm, yank it away from Oblivion, and make it float away from the void. Umbra had stolen an entire region from the realm of Clavicus Vile, alongside a huge portion of the prince's power, and now was safe, secure, and inside an extremely powerful floating island in the middle of the void. Buhan and Umbra then merged and became a singular entity, and ruled what then became the Infernal City, a floating city on an upside-down mountain that was inside of the region that was taken from the realm. Clavicus Vile was furious, but there was nothing he could do. The trickster god had been played. Now, the Infernal City, named Umbriel, is particularly interesting. It just so happened to have been a city inside of the swath of land taken, and this city just so happened to have been one of the many safe havens for the Hist in the universe of Elder Scrolls. The Hist used to have their own worlds, but back in the beginnings of time when the gods fought each other and the original 12 worlds were destroyed, presumably by Alduin, the World Destroyer, a lot of the Hist were killed. Only a few colonies are left, Black March being one of them. There is, of course, the actual realm of the Hist, somewhere in Oblivion, but we don't really know much about that place. What we do know is that there was a family of Histories living in the Fields of Regret, inside of the city, and now those Hists, the inhabitants of the city, and Umbra were now floating in the middle of space. Now, the city has forests and castles and lords and ladies and servants. They all have to eat in order to survive, and there's death and birthings. So for the most part, life in here goes on. Life is actually pretty normal in the Fields of Regret, and also now here in the Infernal City as well. The Histories provide a form of atmosphere and fruits, whereas the powers of Umbra create a recycling of souls to keep the city alive. When a person dies, their soul gets sent back into the Ingenium, who then resends it into a larva who grows into a full-grown humanoid. The Umbrellians are born as adults and are given their lot in life as soon as they come out of their cocoon. Then they only get to live about 15 or so years before they die, but then their soul gets sent back into the machine for it to be resent back into another larva who will then grow into maturity, and the cycle goes on and on. They, however, lose their memories every time they are reborn. Eventually, Umbra decided to invade Nirn, which didn't go particularly well for him. He was defeated by a group of heroes, and the Ingenium was destroyed by one of the heroes throwing the Umbra sword into the artifact, killing Umbra and eliminating the artifact. The Histories, now in control of the city, floated the land towards the realm of the Hist, somewhere in Oblivion where it still stands. This whole event, specifically the invasion of Nirn by Umbra, happened between Elder Scrolls Oblivion and Elder Scrolls Skyrim, but not much is told to us of this event directly in the games. The only major nudge we get comes from Isolde in Whiterun, who mentions the floating city passing through Skyrim. In fact, you might not know, but this is the actual explanation for what exactly is the Sleeping Tree. This is actually a Hist tree, though more precise, a cousin of the Histories as we know them from Black Marsh. This is a history that has lived in Oblivion all its life, and so it is a distant relative to the ones we know, which is why it looks different. This one fell from the floating city as it passed through Skyrim, either as a seed or as a part of the land broke off during the invasion, the only souvenir that we actually have of the Infernal City. We do not actually know if Clavicus Vile ever got his power power back from Umbra when he was killed. Neither the power he gave the sword in order to create it, nor the power that was snatched from him by Umbra himself when he landed in the Fields of Regret. He certainly didn't get his land back, which is now nestled on top of enormous trees in the realm of the Hist, though it would most certainly explain why Clavicus was so upset during the events of Skyrim, and why he was so weak. Maybe this is truly the end of Clavicus Vile, but who knows.